Clint Kubiak is a Kyle Shanahan disciple. The Shanahan, and adjacent schemes have at times given Dan Quinn defenses a whole lot of trouble. Is there any level of concern there if you are Washington? Dan Pizzuta, writer for the 33rd Team, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. Obviously, we're dealing with some surprise news, I think, this week, Dan, with the Noah Brown news that he is out with a pretty significant internal injury. When you watch the Washington offense, how big of a loss is Brown, and how do they, what formula do you think that Cliff uses to replace him, from De'Ami Brown to Luke McCaffrey to the newly signed KJ Osborne?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a loss just because he is the guy who is playing that other outside receiver. And kind of as we've talked about, so many times with at least the version of the Cliff Kingsbury offense up until, 2 weeks ago, where there wasn't a lot of movement for these wide receivers. He was the guy who was playing that, right outside receiver. The thing is that we did talk about last week, going into what we did see them move around guys a little bit. So I do wonder if that is going to be something that sparks a little more movement for this offense. And hopefully that would be the way they do it, using McLaurin a little more in the slot, using him on the right side too. But again, I've always liked De'Ami Brown. Obviously, that has not been something that has really fully, developed into a guy who's been, a top 2 or even a top 3 receiver for this team. But I think he can kind of give some of that vertical stretch. And hopefully, I think he's probably a guy that steps up. I could see McCaffrey, getting a little more run kind of in the slot. So I think it's going to be kind of a mix and match type of thing to kind of fill in the Noah Brown role. I think you still have a lot is going to be put more on Terry McLaurin's plate, probably has an even bigger target share than he has. But I think moving him around, hopefully, if that's something that they, do adjust to, is going to help make some of those targets come easier than they have. So I'll be really interested to see, just how philosophically they do get Brown's role set up in the offense. And I think it'll be more interesting to see how they do that through the scheme and alignment than just a one-for-one player, because I'm hoping that's not necessarily what they're going to do.
Totally agree, and that seems to be the messaging so far from Cliff and from DQ. On the other side of the ball, you have a New Orleans Saints team that started on fire this year. They were 2-0. They scored 100 points in their first 2 games, and then they have been just mostly terrible since, including in their win last week against the Giants. Just the Giants were somehow worse. But one thing that I haven't said this out loud this week, Dan, I've been saving this question for you. If you're Washington, are you at all scared that they run that, Clint Kubiak is a Kyle Shanahan disciple. The Shanahan, and adjacent schemes have at times given Dan Quinn defenses a whole lot of trouble. Is there any level of concern there if you are Washington, or are the Saints just so untalented on offense that there is no scheme in the world that would scare you that much if you are Washington?
Yeah, I'm going to lean toward the latter here, and especially because it seems like Derek Carr is not going to play, which, I think it seemed like he was going to be out for a while, and now they're still saying he might go, but I think they're just kind of pushing that off. I wouldn't expect him to play. So if you either have, Spencer Rattler, who looked like he just didn't belong in the games earlier this season, when he, as someone who has to watch and rank all of the quarterbacks every week, that it was not a fun experience kind of watching him. And then if he doesn't go, that it's Jake Haener. So I think there is definitely, you're either getting a not 100% Derek Carr or 2 quarterbacks that are probably easily, going to be the worst starting quarterback in the league when they go into the lineup. So I don't think there's a lot of scheme that's going to be done there. You're going to have Alvin Kamara, who I think is playing really well and coming on a bounce back season. But outside of that, yeah, there's not a lot of talent on that offense. And I think there's only so much scheme that's going to be able to help them. I mean, there might be one big Marquez Valdez-Scantling play per game, which somehow that has happened. I don't know how, even when the Saints have not been playing well, that you can still somehow get one big MVS play per game that somehow has been like a 70-yard touchdown in the past couple of weeks. But outside of that, I really don't think there's a lot that scares you on that offense.
Yeah, they are very aggressive, at least with Carr at quarterback, and it's like, okay, that's cool. And in some ways, it's like, hey, if we just throw it deep enough, one of these will hit, or we'll get a PI or something. But it is no way to live down in, down out in the NFL, which actually is an oddly smooth transition, Dan, to the last thing I want to ask you about. Is Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team is with us, which is the Philadelphia Eagles offense. And this Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Tiff or not, Brandon Graham putting it out there in the public. Jordan Mailata was asked about it today, and I think he said something along the lines of, like, it's not the Jalen and A.J. show. This team is supposed to be the second best team in the NFC. They've been rolling people since September. The Commanders have them next week, so a lot of eyes, obviously, on what's going on there for Washington selfishly. But, how confident are we in this Eagles team to pull through when it seems like this is kind of some similar type of stuff, both the on-field, perhaps, reasons behind the tiff and locker room kerfuffles, let's call them, for lack of a better word, that derailed them last December when they were also 10 and whatever going into it?
Yeah, I do think there has been better production so far. So I don't, and I think the structure of the offense is better. Although I do understand why there might be some frustrations from individual players. But I think, A.J. Brown is still like second in the league in yards per route run. So it's not like he's not getting his in his offense too. But there are definitely plays within this offense where, there could be a big play, but Hurts is, taking a little longer to process. And the first window where it would have been open is kind of passed up, and he's holding onto the ball a little bit, and then it probably usually ends up turning into a positive play more often than not. But it's not, the design of when, it could have been a bigger play, maybe if the ball was out earlier in the down. So there are a lot of those in this Eagles offense a lot. And I think when I'm going back and looking at these quarterbacks, I'm not sure there's a bigger gap between the individual play of a quarterback and his production in terms of efficiency and EPA per play and that stuff as there is in Jalen Hurts right now, because when I'm watching him, it does look like it's a very kind of disjointed quarterback who's not really playing at the top of his game. But then when you kind of look at what he's able to produce, the way they're still able to, get the ball on third downs, and there's such a wide margin for error because when they do have all of these guys on the field in the passing game where you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and then you have Barkley who's able to run, you only need to get it to the 1 yard line, and Jalen Hurts is going to be, pushing it in and gets a rushing touchdown from there. So yeah, I think there is still a wide margin for error here where I'm not necessarily worried about this Eagles offense suddenly, just completely collapsing over these next couple games. But I do understand why there might be some frustration because it's not completely optimized in a way that you kind of would expect with all of these pieces in place and what the potential could be of this offense. But even when it's not reaching that full potential, it's still been pretty good.
No, I think you described that so well because he has 108 yards passing last week. And you watch them, and just from a process standpoint, I mean, even the touchdown throw that he throws to Devontae Smith when they're in the red zone and it's that out route through some traffic, A.J. Brown's wide open. And based off the route concept, they run a pick for him. I would think he's the primary. And it's why don't you just throw A.J. on the slant? Now, he winds up throwing a touchdown pass, so how mad do you get? And other plays where it's oh, that guy was open, but you ran for 13 yards on 3rd and 11. So, I the EPA stuff, his ability on the tush push, you can't just say that doesn't count. But I would be so fascinated to see his EPA per play numbers without all the 1 yard touchdowns or the 1 yard rushing gains and how that compares. Because his drop off, if you take out those plays, would be tremendous in that particular stat. The thing is, though, at the end of the day, those are really important situations that he is maybe the best in football at, and balancing those two facts has got to be a really hard thing to do as a talent evaluator, both nevertheless for our jobs and talking about it. But if you are Howie Roseman and you're thinking about the future of your franchise and you already paid him, but you got a bunch of more years on a big amount of money.
Yeah, it is certainly interesting. Like if you just look at what he did in week 14, just on its own, he was, I think, 20, where is he? 20th in success rate, so only a 39% success rate, but he was eighth in EPA per play. So like that's an extreme because I think he did have like his worst game of the season this past week. But those are kind of the extremes that you kind of see from what he has been doing. So again, there is such a big margin for error in this offense that they have been able to get through it, and we have seen Hurts play at a better level. Like this, I think there has been a bit of a drop off from him as a processor and a passer from even like what we saw a little bit earlier in the year. I think he was a little better, and even especially the first half of last season. So I think there still is going to be potential for him to kind of improve as a passer, but right now, yeah, there is definitely this disconnect between how good this offense can be, how good it currently is, and I do understand there could be some internal frustration about the gap there, even though the results have been good.
Dan Pizzuta, 33rd team. You can read his work there, the weekly quarterback rankings, deep dives on all kinds of different things. Always great stuff, and he's always great with us here on the radio as well. Dan, always appreciate you, sir, and we will talk to you next week.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Dan Pizzuta, everybody, with us here on The Hoffman Show.